Everyone knows the United States had a civil war in the 1800s. Lincoln wins the election, the South secedes, the Union prevails, slavery is abolished, mostly. Lincoln's mind is blown at the theater, kid stuff. Well, we had one civil war, yes, but what about the second Civil War? A war in the South in the 1800s in which a controversial election led to two leaders fighting over who had the right to govern. Shots were fired, people died. I'll admit this is a war that wasn't exactly fought by the United States, but definitely in the United States. In Arkansas, not even 10 years after the War of the Rebellion was finished, two men with nearly identical beliefs turned Little Rock into a war zone. Mr. President? Mr. President, they're expecting you in the Oval Office. I'm checking my socials. I'm the president. I need to know things, even if 90% of it is a waste of my time. Sir, this is why we have daily briefings. But they're so dry and boring, almost as bad as the news. Well, sir, we could get you a subscription to Morning Brew. Morning Brew? Aren't they just like the others, except they're sinking money into YouTube? No, sir. Their newsletter is witty, relevant, informative, and will catch you up on business, finance, and tech in just 5 minutes. So, hypothetically, if I were reading Morning Brew the week of May 2nd, 2022, well, first thing in the morning, you'd be caught up on the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Pretty big deal. You'd catch the latest trends in the market, from celebrity cocktails to weed ETFs. I do like money. And to round it off, the orange juice industry is trying to boost sales by selling cereal that you're supposed to eat with OJ instead of milk. What? I know. Oh, that is gnarly. Don't knock it till you try it. Then knock it. 100% knock it. Alright, I'm a history buff who shares an interest in business, tech, and/or finance. Fetch the credit card, will you? Oh no, it's totally free. But they'll still need my info after the— Nope, free forever. All you do is go to morningbrewdaily.com/JackRackham or follow the link in the description, give them your email, and in 15 seconds you're all set. Well, isn't this marvelous? Let's see what their top story is today. What's this about Arkansas? Our story begins in Ohio with a man named Joseph Brooks. Now, old Joey Brooks led a simple life. He was a newspaper editor who'd made honest money in the cotton industry. He was the proud father of 6 beautiful children, and his wife was good enough. Eliza good enough. But poor Joe lost a small fortune in the early years of the Civil War. To provide a living for his family, he enlisted in the Army and served as the chaplain of the 56th United States Colored Infantry Regiment, though he was definitely white. I don't know, beats me. As for how he ended up in Arkansas, well, he was originally stationed there during the war, and then you had laws like the Homestead Act of 1866 that sold a bunch of land in the South to freedmen and Unionists for rock-bottom prices. But what often ended up happening was some wealthy northerner would come down south, buy up a bunch of land, and suddenly become one of the most powerful and influential voices in the community. Such folks were called carpetbaggers, and Mr. Brooks was definitely one of them. He'd restored his family's fortunes and become a prominent party organizer and campaigner. But he quickly learned there's always a bigger fish. The head honcho of the Arkansas Republican Party was this guy, Powell Clayton, and Brooks, for his part, was a loyal party member. When Clayton ran for the governor's office, Brooks raised money for him, he campaigned for him. Some people even say he tipped the scales in more nefarious ways. But Clayton did not repay the favor. Probably not because of the shady implications, more like because Brooks was pretty radical, calling on the government to take land away from powerful Confederates and redistribute it among ex-slaves, which was actually going to be a thing on the eastern seaboard until Lincoln got shot and President Johnson nixed it. Either way, Brooks is seething, and so when 1872 rolls around, he nominates himself for governor against Clayton's chosen successor, Elisha Baxter. Now, on the surface, Brooks and Baxter must have seemed like polar opposites. Brooks was a dirty carpetbagger, and Baxter was a native Arkansan, Arky. But in reality, the two of them? Oh god, I wish there were videos of their debates. Friends, Arkansasans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Now I've had enough of these carpetbaggers coming down and acting like they own the place. It's been almost a decade since the Civil War ended, and I think it's time to give voting rights back to the ex-Confederate soldiers out there. My fellow Arkansananas, I've just about had it with these turncoat, union-lovin' southern scalawags. Now I'm here for a very simple reason, and that's because it's high time to give voting rights back to all the ex-Confederate soldiers out there. What the Sam heck? Well, all the other states are doing it. It's happening eventually. I may as well get the votes. What happened to reparations? Oh, right. Also, I have black friends from Army. I support public education and smaller government. I support smaller government and public education. Election day finally comes, and we don't know who actually won. Election fraud was way more common in the 19th century than it is today. Stuff like mixing up party symbols to confuse illiterate voters, holding voting stations open until the count comes in from other counties to fudge the numbers, even if you ended up with more votes than there are voters. Brooks might have won, but we'll never know for sure. It was Baxter who cinched the election and took his seat in the governor's office. But Brooks is a gentleman. He doesn't immediately pick up a shotgun and march to the state house. He spends a year trying to get the courts to back him up. But remember how Baxter was being supported by Clayton? Clayton still had huge power in the Arkansas Republican Party. A bunch of judges owed him their jobs, and so when Brooks came up protesting Clayton and Baxter doing shady business behind the scenes, they didn't even let him into court. They just plugged their ears and said, la 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 la, not listening. After that year, however, well, Baxter starts getting a little too big for his britches. He sees the way the tides are turning, and even though the Democrats at this point in time are clearly the favorite party of the ex-Confederates, Baxter sees them as a valuable voting bloc and starts courting them by reversing a lot of Clayton's old policies. Clayton is not happy. He's going to undo everything I worked for. By God, I wish there was a way we could throw him out of office before the next election and replace him with someone more loyal to the party. Wait a second. Brooks. Send a telegram to the courts. Tell them it's time to take him a little more seriously. And suddenly, wouldn't you know it, one of the courts has all the time in the world to hear him out, and they agreed completely. Not just that there should be an investigation into Baxter. Nah, they just flat out declared Joseph Brooks to be the actual governor of Arkansas. So Brooks gets in touch with the local sheriff, picks up a shotgun, and marches to the state house. Pardon me, we'd like to invite you to leave now. So Baxter is escorted out of the state house, but he refuses to go down without a fight. He creates a government in exile in a hotel 5 blocks away. Immediately, both men reach out to their allies across the state, calling them to come to Little Rock with arms. No shots had been fired yet, but you could feel it in the air. Something was about to go down. Brooks broke into the state armory. Baxter began looting local shops and taking their guns. Both men started stacking as much furniture as they can against the doors and windows and out into the lawns to create their barricades. In Washington, D.C., President Ulysses S. Grant got the news. They're doing what? Yeah, I don't really know what to tell you. They both say the other one took over the government and they're getting ready for war. And Baxter's one of ours. They're both one of ours, sir. I don't get it. What are they fighting over? I guess they just don't like each other. Okay, you know what? They can figure this out. Just send in a regiment so they don't all kill each other. By the way, the Comanche are getting uppity again. Something about killing all the buffalo. Might need you to draw up some plans. Grant sends in Colonel Rose to monitor the situation, and when he arrives in town, he sees, well, 2 buildings with half their furniture thrown out onto the lawn, and a giant parade. Oh, I see y'all, came to an agreement. Agreement? With this brindle-tail? Hardly. That daggum sugar-honey iced tea eating carpetbagger wants to show off how many men he got? Well, 2 can play at that game. Cotton-picking minstrel fart knocker! Ooh! Louder, boys, louder! That's right, the Brooks-Baxter War began with a battle of the bands. But the angry Baxter band grew closer and closer to the state capitol, and insults kept flying, and it was clear everyone's trigger finger was itching. That's when Colonel Rose made the decision to intervene. We're gonna string you up! Gentlemen, please! I won't have you starting a riot! Ooh, ah, ooh, ah, First blood had been drawn. Miraculously, the only man to be killed in the first Battle of Little Rock was Major D.F. Shaw, who happened to be looking out his window at the unfortunate moment when Colonel Rose's horse bumped into one of the Baxter men. Colonel Rose now found himself an unwitting third party in the war and began constructing his own fortifications in between the two sides in order to keep them in neutral corners. The two governors used this lull to begin digging trenches along the street, turning Little Rock into the Western Front. The colonel wrote back to President Grant requesting the federal government to help transport everyone back to their homes across the state, but the president was insistent that the matter be settled by the men in Arkansas. And while Colonel Rose was for the most part successful in stopping all-out war in the capital, the battle to deliver and intercept reinforcements grew ever bloodier, as Brooks and Baxter would soon learn for themselves. One such battle began when Baxter sent troops from his HQ down the river to intercept a boat full of guns being delivered to Brooks. When Brooks looked out the window and saw Baxter's men leaving across the street, he sent his own men down the river. The two forces met some miles outside of town. Baxter's ship was captured and brought back to the State House, the decks covered in blood, the captain still bleeding out in the cabin. Meanwhile, in Washington, "Senator Clayton, the president would like to see you." Clayton? A team of attorneys showed up at the White House today requesting to negotiate a peace conference. I'm only going to ask this once. What on God's green earth is happening in Arkansas? Brooks and Baxter both had friends in D.C. who were finally able to get peace talks started. They came up with an agreement to get Brooks out of the State House, set him up in a new location 5 blocks west, and create a demilitarized zone where an assembly could work out all their differences. Only, nuh-uh! So the Baxter clan had another idea. They dug a massive cannon out of the banks of the Arkansas River and pointed it at the State House, while the state legislature got together and voted for Baxter. That was good enough for Grant, and he ordered Brooks remove himself from the office immediately. The Baxter party celebrated with a parade. In the end, Baxter kept the governorship, Clayton kept his seat in the United States Senate, Brooks was made the state postmaster general as a consolation prize. 200 other people were dead, and there was much rejoicing.